Why was the commander handing her the rifle? That question echoed in the stunned silence of the Syrian morning. Dust hung in the air like a curtain, the desert sun already fierce, and yet the weight of that single moment pressed heavier than the heat. Commander Jake Viper, Navy SEAL, legend among his men, extended his custom .50 caliber rifle to someone the team still half-joked was just the medic. Her fingers hesitated before they wrapped around the weapon, not because she didn't know what it was, but because she knew too well what it meant, and because every man watching her assumed it was a mistake. They thought they knew. She was 23, barely 5'4", with hair that always slipped out of her bun no matter how tightly she tied it. To them, she was the gentle Swedish medic, the one who patched torn flesh, disinfected gear, reminded them to hydrate, and worried over their wounds while they worried about firefights. The doc who was useful, essential even, but not one of them. And that was the story they'd chosen to believe. What they didn't see was the woman awake since 400, hunched over casualty reports from other battlefields, studying wound patterns like puzzle pieces. What they didn't see was the ballistics manual tucked beneath her medical texts, or the marksmanship theories she devoured in the dim light after midnight. They never asked why she disappeared to the range when they slept or played cards. They never questioned why her medical bag looked different, heavier, stocked with supplies arranged as though she anticipated injuries before they even happened. No one asked, because no one imagined the medic might be more than the medic. The irony was almost cruel. Back home, in a country most of them couldn't place on a map, had been a champion, a precision shooter since age 15, medals stacked in her father's attic like forgotten proof of another life. He had trained her, a quiet man with scars he never explained, a former operator who taught her discipline alongside marksmanship, who told her that skill was nothing without control, and control was nothing without purpose. She had learned to breathe into her shot, to quiet her heart until the rifle barrel seemed like an extension of her body. But here, surrounded by the best-trained warriors in the world, she was invisible. At briefings, she sat in the back scribbling notes about likely casualty scenarios while her mind calculated fields of fire, terrain choke points, sniper nests the others didn't mention. She had opinions, strategies, even warnings. But when she spoke, the room nodded politely and turned back to its real work. She was there to fix them after they bled, not to stop them from bleeding in the first place. Respectful, affectionate, protective. That was how they treated her, and somehow that stung worse than open dismissal, because it meant they never once considered she might carry more than gauze and morphine in her pack. The base's range was her sanctuary. At first, she went with only her sidearm, sneaking late at night when no one else was around. It was a secret discipline, the kind that kept her breathing steady in the small hours when loneliness pressed against the thin walls of her quarters. Over time, the range officer Martinez, a grizzled ex-ranger who'd seen too many wars, began leaving rifles out, almost by accident, almost like an invitation. He didn't say much, just watched. And when he realized the shots she fired were not the luck of a medic dabbling, but the rhythm of someone who had lived with a rifle in her hands, his silence became complicity. That was her obsession. She'd never fired it, not officially, not with permission, but she'd studied it like anatomy, memorized its quirks, its breathing, understood how it could shift the balance of a battlefield. To her, it was no longer just a machine. It was a possibility. Still, she knew the truth. Her role was fixed, her lane painted in thick lines, medics healed, snipers killed, and crossing that boundary wasn't bravery, it was career suicide. So she played her part. She smiled, checked vitals, taped wounds, and accepted the small jokes. She bore the nickname Doc like a badge, even as it quietly fenced her in. But inside, frustration coiled with each mission. There had been the recon job 3 weeks earlier when the team needed Arabic translation and she'd raised her hand. She spoke fluently. It was in her file, but they waved her off with fatherly smiles and brought in a stranger instead. There had been the sniper mission last month, when their designated marksman was injured and command pulled in help from another team rather than glance in her direction. She wanted to scream, not because she craved glory, but because she knew she could have done it. She knew she could have helped. Each dismissal left a bruise no one else could see. Each polite, "Not your role, Doc," was a reminder that to them she was defined by a single credential, not by capability. And yet she kept preparing. In secret, she memorized ranges and wind drift tables, studied tactical radio codes, and practiced strength drills that would let her haul more than a medic's kit. She rehearsed mental exercises from her days in competitive shooting, slowing her pulse until even adrenaline couldn't shake her hands. She built a version of herself no one believed existed, not even the man who had handpicked her for this unit because of her trauma expertise. Commander, innovative as he was, had the same blind spot as his men. He valued her deeply, but only for half of who she was. It wore on her, the weight of invisibility. Sometimes late at night she asked herself why she bothered, why she studied manuals no one would let her use, why she kept pushing against walls that never moved. The whispers in her head were cruel. "You're wasting your time. They'll never see you." And yet another voice, quieter but sharper, always answered back. "And what if one day they need you?" That possibility kept her moving. And she had no idea how close that day really was. It began with a slip, a comment tossed out during inventory by Bulldog, the team's marksman, and her reluctant big brother in uniform. "You know, Doc spends a lot of time at the range for someone who's supposed to hand out bandages." His tone was joking, but it landed heavy. Another operator chuckled. "Yeah, and always asking about weapon specs. Kinda funny, huh?" Froze, pretending to be busy counting syringes, but her chest burned. What had once been invisible was now suspicious. Curiosity had turned into whispers. And whispers in a place like this could destroy you. Soon she felt the shift. Conversations paused when she entered a room. Jokes carried an edge. Even Martinez, her quiet mentor at the range, pulled her aside. "Maybe dial it back, Doc. People are starting to wonder why you care so much about things that aren't your job." His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they carried disappointment. Her world shrank, privileges restricted, questions dismissed, her ambitions reframed as arrogance. She, who had given everything to being better, was now painted as someone ungrateful for her lane. The weight of it pressed on her like a secret shame. She wanted to explain, to tell them that she studied ballistics because it helped her anticipate injuries, that she trained because she wanted to carry more than her share of the burden, that she wanted to serve more, not less. But to defend herself would only prove their point, that she didn't know her place. And still she couldn't stop. Because in the back of her mind lived a fear. The fear that one day there would be no sniper, no translator, no operator to fill the gap. That one day she would be the last line between survival and disaster. And if that moment came, she refused to be unprepared. That morning, as the team filed into another routine briefing, sat quietly at the back, her notebook open, her eyes tracking maps and positions. She made notes not only of casualty routes but of elevation lines, cover points, probable ambush sites. Her pen moved quickly, almost feverishly, as if she knew the script of the day was about to change. She couldn't have known it, not consciously, but deep down, some part of her had always been waiting. And when the call came hours later, the desperate broken transmission, Overwatch down, compromised, her hands went still. Because she knew. This was the moment. The one she'd been preparing for in silence, in shadows, in solitude. And the question no one had asked, what if the medic could do more than heal, was about to be answered. What happens when the one person no one trusts with a rifle is the only one who can save them? That question crackled beneath the radio static, heavy as the desert air. Overwatch down, compromised, Williams down under heavy fire. The words fell like stones in the operations center. Everyone froze for a fraction of a second. Then chaos erupted, voices shouting, screens lighting up, maps pulled into desperate consultation. Commander stood at the center of it all, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the blinking red indicator marking the sniper team's position. Pushed through the crowd, her heart thundering in her chest. On the main display, she recognized the ridge line instantly. She'd memorized its contours, traced its angles on stolen nights when she studied terrain maps instead of sleeping. It was the perfect Overwatch point. Unless the enemy flanked it, unless escape routes vanished, unless there was silence. That silence now screamed louder than any weapon. His voice cut sharp over the radios. Viper 6, report status immediately. The reply was broken, half smothered by static. Base, Williams down, under heavy fire, can't maintain position. His throat tightened. Sergeant Williams, their designated marksman, was hit. His shooting arm, which meant that their lifeline to protecting the convoy, was useless. She saw the math faster than anyone else seemed willing to. Convoy ETA, 20 minutes. Enemy advance, 15. Backup sniper support, 40. The equation didn't balance, not unless someone stepped into the impossible. Options, barked, scanning the room. Artillery support. Too close to friendlies. Immediate extraction. That abandons the convoy. Wait for backup snipers. Not enough time. Each answer circled back to failure. His eyes flicked to the digital countdown at the bottom of the screen. Each passing second was a life slipping closer to the kill zone. She felt the old ache rise in her chest, the same one she carried after every briefing where her input was ignored, every mission where her skills were dismissed. She thought of the hours spent memorizing tables of bullet drop, rehearsing her breathing until her pulse obeyed, studying wound ballistics not just to heal but to predict. Her preparation was meant for this, wasn't it? Her hand twitched, she swallowed, and then, before she could overthink, she spoke. "Sir, I can do it." The words barely rose above the din, fragile as glass. No one heard. She forced them out again, louder. "Commander, sir, I can provide sniper support." The operations center went still. Every head turned. Some eyes widened. Others softened into pity. A few narrowed in disbelief. His gaze locked on hers with something between irritation and concern, as though she'd lost her grip on reality. He said evenly, "This is not the time for medical questions. You'll coordinate casualty once we—" "I'm not asking about medical procedures, sir." Her voice was steady now, fueled by the adrenaline burning in her veins. "I'm volunteering to take the—" Silence. It was the kind of silence that swallows a room whole. "Absolutely not." His reply cracked like a gavel. "You're medical personnel, not a sniper. I need qualified operators, not—" He stopped short of saying it, but the implication was clear. "Not you." His pulse pounded. "Sir, with respect, I am qualified." "You've studied manuals," Bulldog interjected, his voice low but firm. "That's not the same as combat shooting. This isn't a range, Doc. This is life and death." Her eyes flicked to him. His concern was genuine. His doubt was too. He'd been her protector since day one, treating her like a little sister who needed shielding. But tonight, his words pressed like a weight against her chest. "I know this ballistics," she said, louder now, forcing every syllable past the disbelief in the room. "I know the engagement ranges. The targets are stationary. Known distances. This isn't a stalk through the jungle, it's Overwatch fire from a prepared position." "It's combat," shot back. "Combat changes everything, the stress, the pressure, the consequences of missing. You don't know what that feels like." He wasn't wrong. She never fired the in battle. She never pulled the trigger with lives hanging in the balance. But she had spent nights alone, visualizing it until the weight of the moment lived in her bones. She had trained herself to carry that burden long before it was placed on her shoulders. The countdown ticked. Convoy ETA, 16 minutes. Enemy advance, 13. Backup support, 36. Mathematics didn't care about hierarchy. She drew in a sharp breath, and the memory of her father's words came back to her. Control is nothing without purpose. Her purpose stood right in front of her. His eyes were hard. Request, you will remain medical personnel. Do you understand? His throat tightened. She could feel the dismissal crashing down on her like all the others. Only this time the cost wasn't hers alone to bear. If she obeyed, men would die. A convoy would burn. Families would receive folded flags instead of homecomings. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Sir, what alternative do you have? It was a dangerous question, one that edged toward insubordination. His jaw tightened, his silence louder than a shout, but before he could answer, the radio erupted. Base, this is Viper 6. Enemy contact imminent. We can't hold without sniper support. The convoy will be exposed. Request immediate instructions. The words tore through the room. Everyone stared at the commander. Everyone knew there were no instructions left that could save both positions. Except hers. His breath caught. This was it, the very moment she had feared, prepared for, and prayed would never come. Her hand clenched into a fist at her side. She knew what she had to do. And it would cost her everything. She turned without waiting for permission, slipping out of the operations center before anyone could stop her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, not with fear but with clarity. 11 minutes until the convoy entered the danger zone. 13 until the Overwatch collapsed. 34 until backup arrived. The math was cold, but it was simple. She sprinted to her quarters, shoving past startled support staff. Inside, her gear was already staged, the things no one knew she'd been collecting, tucked between regulation bandages and IV kits. A tactical radio tuned to memorized frequencies, range estimation tools, extra protection she wasn't supposed to own, and notes, endless notes filled with calculations, scenarios, diagrams. Each item spoke of months of secrecy, of preparation no one wanted her to admit. She hesitated only once, pulling open a drawer and finding the letter she'd written months earlier. A letter to her family, sealed in case she didn't come back. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. She wanted to rewrite it, to explain, but there wasn't time. There never was when decisions mattered most. Her pack was heavy on her shoulders as she moved. Her legs carried her like she'd rehearsed this very sprint 1,000 times, because she had. At the base gate, she held up her medical bag. "Emergency resupply for the Overwatch team," she said, voice steady. The guard waved her through without inspection. After all, she was just the medic. Her vehicle bumped over the dirt track, each jolt rattling through her bones. The radio hissed with fragments of desperation. Williams losing blood, the team under pressure, the convoy demanding answers. 7 minutes out, she cut the radio. If she heard his voice now, she might lose her nerve. And nerve was the only thing she had left. The ridge loomed ahead, gunfire crackling in the distance. She parked in cover, slung her pack, and ran. The terrain was brutal, but her training carried her, muscles burning, lungs screaming. Every step pounded with a single thought: this is the moment. This is why I prepared. When she crested the ridge, the sounds of battle hit her full force. The thunder of machine guns, the staccato bursts of rifles, the desperate shouts of men fighting to hold. Smoke curled against the horizon. She keyed her radio. "Viper 6, this is Doc. I'm approaching from the southeast with medical supplies and additional support capabilities." Static, then a panicked reply. "Negative, Doc. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. This position is hot. We can't protect you." Her boots pounded the dirt as she advanced anyway. Her breath came ragged, but her voice stayed steady. "Too late. I'm already here." She climbed the final rise and the scene unfolded. Williams, pale and bleeding, his arm bound but useless, crouched over torn between holding position and abandoning it. Firing bursts into the valley below. Enemy forces swarming closer, moving like shadows through the dust. Dropped beside them, her bag hitting the dirt. "I can stabilize him," she said, already pressing gauze against Williams's wound. "But someone has to take the—" Blinked at her. His mouth opened, closed. Williams grimaced, his voice raw. "Doc, are you saying you—" "I'm saying I've trained for this. I know the ballistics. I can make the shots." For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Williams coughed, blood flecking his lips, and rasped the words that would tilt the balance of everything. "Then take the rifle." Her hands, slick with his blood, settled on the weapon she had only ever touched in stolen moments. It was heavier than she imagined, heavier than any manual could prepare her for. The convoy was minutes away. The enemy was closing. And for the first time, was no longer just the medic. How steady can a medic's hands be when the first trigger pulled decides who lives and who dies? That was the question burning in his mind as she pressed her cheek to the stock. The rifle was massive, almost absurd against her frame, its matte black metal radiating a cold weight that felt more like judgment than steel. She studied every diagram, memorized every part, rehearsed every motion in the quiet hours of solitude. But knowing a weapon in theory and firing it under fire were two worlds apart. And this was no range, this was combat. The desert wind cut sharp across the ridge, carrying the dust of battle. Williams lay pale beside her, biting down on a groan as she checked his bandage one last time. His blood soaked the gauze, but the bleeding was under control for now. "You good to call targets?" she asked him, her voice low, steady. His face was drawn, his right arm useless, but his eyes burned with clarity. "I can spot. I can range, but you have to pull the trigger, Doc." Doc, that word again. A name meant to remind her of her place, of what she was. But in his voice in that moment it wasn't dismissal, it was trust. She drew a breath, deep and slow, the way her father had taught her when nerves threatened to take over. Inhale, hold, exhale. Let the world shrink to the scope. "First target," Williams rasped. 11 o'clock, 800 meters, enemy sniper in a sandbag nest. He's got eyes on the convoy route. Swung the into position. Through the scope, the world narrowed into a tunnel of clarity. The enemy sniper crouched in his nest, his rifle already aligned on the dusty road below where the convoy would appear. Her hands trembled at first. Not from fear, not exactly, but from the raw flood of adrenaline, the pounding reminder that she was stepping into a role she was never supposed to fill. She forced the breath again. Inhale, hold, exhale. The crosshairs settled. Her finger tightened against the trigger. The roared. The recoil slammed her shoulder, thunder splitting the desert air. Through the scope, she watched the figure collapse backward in a cloud of dust. Her first shot, her first kill. No time to feel it, no time to process the weight of it. "Next," she whispered, almost to herself. 2 o'clock, 900 meters, Williams called, his voice taut. "Machine gun nest. They'll cut the convoy to pieces if they set up." Adjusted, her mind racing through the calculations she'd practiced until they became reflex. Range, wind, drop, correction. She dialed in the scope, felt her breath settle again, and squeezed. The cracked, the nest fell silent. Crouched beside her, risked a glance. His disbelief was raw, almost painful to look at. "Doc, what the hell?" "Focus," snapped, surprising even herself with the edge in her tone. "They're not stopping." And they were. The enemy, startled by the thunder of the .50 cal, was already shifting. Smoke grenades popped below, plumes of white and gray clawing upward. Movement flickered through the haze, fast, coordinated, determined to overrun the ridge. 3 targets moving, Williams barked. 10 o'clock, 7:50, cover to cover, one's leading the charge. Tracked the shapes through the smoke, her scope searching for that fleeting moment of exposure. Her pulse hammered, her mouth dry. Competitive shooting had taught her timing, but this wasn't a medal at stake. These were lives. The first figure broke cover. She exhaled, squeezed, and watched him crumple mid-stride. The second followed. Another shot, another fall. The third moved smarter, weaving, darting, vanishing behind rocks. Tracked, waiting. Every second stretched, every nerve screaming that she was running out of time. And then a stumble, a brief slip of motion. She fired. The figure dropped. Williams gave a short nod, pain twisting his face but respect in his eyes. Good shooting. Damn good. The radio crackled. Convoy 90 seconds from danger zone. Repeat 90 seconds. His chest tightened. 90 seconds to hold the line. 90 seconds until everything she had done or failed to do would matter. Enemy fire raked the ridge, bullets snapping overhead, stone shards spraying into her face. Cursed, firing bursts into the valley. His jaw clenched, turned to her. "Doc, I don't know how the hell you're doing this, but keep going. You're the only thing keeping that convoy alive." The words hit harder than the recoil. The only thing. Another target appeared, closer now, too close. Shifted, sighted, fired. This report cracked the air. Silence followed. "Convoy entering zone," the radio announced. "We need Overwatch now." Muscles burned. Sweat stung her eyes. She cycled the massive rifle again. Each shot echoed down the ridge, each impact carving space between life and death. Through the scope, she saw enemy figures drop, their movements stilled by her hand. She didn't have time to think about what that meant. Then came the call that froze her blood. 12 o'clock, 1,000 meters, enemy sniper. He sighted on the convoy lead vehicle. You miss, we lose them. The longest shot she'd ever attempted. 1,000 meters, the edge of her studied ranges, no room for error. Her breath slowed, the world shrank again. She saw him, a silhouette in the haze, poised, steady, waiting for his own kill. Her crosshairs steadied, her fingers squeezed. The thundered, the figure dropped. The convoy rumbled into view moments later, armored vehicles kicking up clouds of dust as they pushed through the danger zone. Through her scope, she saw them safe, alive, protected by a medic who was never supposed to touch the rifle that had saved them. His voice was thick with disbelief. "Doc, you just held the line by yourself." Didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. Her hands shook, the adrenaline finally catching up. She forced her breathing calm, her eyes on the valley, scanning for more. The radio hissed again. Commander's voice, sharp with anger. "Viper 6, report status of medical personnel who departed base without authorization." The words cut deep. She wasn't just risking her life. She was risking her career. Williams, pale but alert, gave her a weak smile. "Doc, you just proved something none of them wanted to believe." She exhaled, her cheek pressed against the rifle. "I didn't prove anything yet. We're not out of this." Because the enemy wasn't retreating, they were regrouping. Smoke thickened, shapes shifting below. They weren't done. And neither was she. How long can one person carry two roles before something breaks? That question clawed at, as the echoes of her last shot faded over the valley. For a moment there was silence. Then the desert erupted. The enemy had seen the convoy escape the kill zone. Rage turned into momentum. Smoke grenades billowed, rifles cracked, machine guns raked the ridge. Bullets punched stone into shrapnel. The air filled with dust and chaos. Ducked low, her heart pounding as fragments sliced her cheek. The lay heavy in her hands, its barrel hot, its thunder still echoing in her bones. She was no longer invisible. The medic had made herself the primary target. "Here they come," shouted, spraying bursts down the slope. Shapes surged through the smoke, dark figures rushing cover to cover, their fire disciplined, relentless. Snapped the into position, sighted, fired. One fell. Another stumbled. A third crawled behind rocks, bullets snapping past her ear. She worked mechanically, her training clawing its way to the surface. Inhale, hold, exhale. The rifle roared and the desert answered with silence where enemies had been. But then a sound cut sharper than gunfire. Williams, lying beside her, groaned deep, clutching his side. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The field dressing had held for a while, but the movement, the strain, the heat, It was unraveling. His gut twisted. She was a medic. She was supposed to be at his side. She was supposed to drop the rifle, tear open her bag, and fight for his pulse. That was her oath. That was her purpose. But down the slope the enemy advanced. Dozens, maybe more. If she stopped firing, they'd reach the ridge in minutes. The convoy, barely out of range, would be caught in a new ambush. Her hands froze between two worlds, the blood on her gloves and the steel of the rifle. "Doc," Williams' voice rasped, his eyes half-lidded. "Don't stop, keep them off, I'll hold." Her throat closed. She wanted to argue, to tell him he mattered more than any convoy, any mission. But his gaze pinned her in place. Not pleading, not weak, demanding. "Do your job," he whispered, "all of it." Her chest shook as she swallowed back the ache. Slowly, painfully, she turned back to the scope. The next target appeared, two figures rushing with an RPG. Her breath steadied. She squeezed. The blast never came. The thundered again, and each time felt herself slipping further from who she had been and deeper into who she was becoming. "Convoy clear of kill zone," the radio crackled. Relief rippled, but it was short-lived. "Multiple hostiles regrouping on ridge. Hold position until QRF arrives." Hold position. The word stabbed into her. She had no idea how long hold meant. 10 minutes, 20. Each second stretched like an hour. Bullets chewed into the ridge. Cursed reloading. His voice was a growl over the comms, calling for supporting fire that wouldn't come in time. Fired again, the recoil bruising her shoulder, the barrel vibrating with every shot. Her vision blurred with sweat. Her breath came harsh, shallow. Her body screamed from the weight of the rifle, the endless cycle of fire and reload. She was trained for medicine, not this. Her muscles weren't built for hours of suppressive fire, and yet she kept going. Every time she thought about stopping, she saw Williams' pale face, felt the convoy's survival in her hands, heard her father's voice whispering in memory. Control is nothing without purpose. Her purpose was here, now. Then came the shout, his voice raw, reloading. The enemy chose that instant to surge, their silhouettes bursting through the smoke, closer than ever. Swung the down, but it was too slow for point blank. She dropped it, yanked her sidearm, and fired 3 shots fast, desperate. One fell. The others staggered back. His rifle barked beside her, cutting down the rest. His breath came hard, his eyes flicking to her. "You keep shooting like that, Doc, and you're gonna put me out of a job." It was meant as humor, but the look he gave her carried something more. Respect. A glimmer of it, sharp and reluctant. Didn't smile. She couldn't. Not with Williams bleeding beside her, not with her hands trembling from exhaustion, not with the enemy still pressing. Another burst of fire raked the ridge. Grunted, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his uniform. He dropped back, teeth clenched. His medic instincts surged. She dropped the pistol, sliding to his side, ripping her bag open. Gauze, pressure, bandage. Her movements were quick, practiced, efficient. She pressed down hard, felt his pulse hammer against her fingers. "You'll live," she said firmly, meeting his wide eyes. "Stay low, I'll cover." She grabbed the motion seamless now, medic and sniper in one. She fired, and the ridge roared with thunder. Her mind fractured into compartments, each one burning with focus. One half counted pulse rates, calculated blood loss, whispered triage notes in silence. The other half calculated wind drift, bullet drop, range estimation. Both halves screamed for attention. Both halves refused to yield. And she realized with a hollow ache that this was who she had become. Not one or the other, both. Minutes bled into eternity. Shot after shot, breath after breath. The enemy slowed, faltered, their advance blunted by her relentless fire. At last the radio cracked alive. "This is QRF inbound. ETA 4 minutes, hold position." 4 minutes, it felt like forever. Shoulder was bruised raw, her body ached, her vision swam. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. not until she saw the dust trail of friendly vehicles cresting the horizon. When the reinforcements roared in, guns blazing, the enemy scattered. The ridge fell silent at last, save for the ragged breaths of the wounded and the ringing in its ears. She lowered the slowly, her arms trembling, her cheek raw where it had pressed against the stock. Around her the team slumped, exhausted, bleeding, alive. Gave a weak laugh, wincing through the pain. "Doc, you're not just a medic, not anymore." Didn't answer. She looked down at her hands, at the blood staining her gloves, at the bruises from the rifle. She wasn't sure what she was anymore. But she knew this much. The line she had crossed could never be uncrossed. Why is surviving sometimes harder than the fight itself? That question haunted as the armored vehicles rolled back into the compound under the sinking desert sun. The convoy had made it, the ridge had held. Reinforcements had arrived in time to scatter the enemy. By all measurable standards, the mission was a success. Yet no one cheered, not in the way they usually did. The air around her was heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Sat in the back of the lead MRAP, her rifle across her knees. Not that had been claimed by the quartermaster the second they returned, but her own standard-issue carbine, which felt suddenly small and almost laughable in her hands. Her gloves were still stiff with dried blood. Williams' and some hers. She stared at them as the vehicle rocked across the uneven dirt, and a question kept circling in her head. What have I done? Leaned against the wall beside her, his shoulder bandaged, pale but conscious. He kept stealing glances at her, like he was trying to reconcile the medic he'd trusted with the sniper who had held the ridge. His lips parted once, as if he wanted to say something, but he closed them again, silence winning. Across from her, Bulldog watched openly, his dark eyes unreadable. There was no mockery, no dismissal, just a weight that made her chest tighten. Respect, judgment, maybe both. When they rolled through the gates, the compound buzzed with whispers. Faces turned, eyes widened, conversations hushed. Word had already spread. The medic had carried the medic had held the line, the medic had killed. Some of the looks carried admiration, others suspicion, but all of them carried something she could never erase. She wasn't invisible anymore. The moment her boots hit the ground, Commander was there. His presence always commanded attention, broad-shouldered, calm even in chaos, his voice the kind that carried without shouting. But this time, his eyes were cold. "My office now." Her throat tightened, but she forced her legs to move. The others lingered, exchanging glances, some sympathetic, some cautious. Gave her the barest nod, a silent promise that he'd back her up if asked. Just looked down at the dirt. Inside the commander's office, the air was cooler, darker. Maps lined the walls, red pins marking too many places where blood had been spilled. Closed the door, folded his arms, and fixed her with a stare that stripped her bare. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked quietly. Swallowed, "Yes, sir." "No," his voice sharpened. "You don't. You disobeyed a direct order. You abandoned your assigned station. You took a weapon you were not cleared to operate, and you engaged the enemy without authorization." Each charge landed like a hammer. She flinched but held his gaze. "With respect, sir," she said, her voice low but steady, "if I hadn't, the convoy would be gone. Williams would be dead, too. The ridge would have fallen." His jaw tightened. For a flicker of a moment, doubt shadowed his eyes. Then he shook his head. "That doesn't matter. We have roles for a reason. Discipline, structure. If every soldier decided they knew better than their orders, we'd have chaos." Her chest ached, anger and shame tangling in her ribs. "So what was I supposed to do, sir? Watch them die? Watch the convoy get torn apart? Stand by with my medical bag while I could have stopped it?" His silence was louder than any shout. For a moment he looked at her not as a commander, not as a disciplinarian, but as a man who had seen too many impossible choices. His eyes softened just slightly. Then the steel returned. "You'll face review," he said flatly. "Command will decide what to do with you. Dismissed." The word cut like a blade, dismissed, not thanked, not even acknowledged, just dismissed. Walked out of the office into the heavy dusk. The compound still buzzed. She felt eyes follow her every step, whispers trailing like shadows. Hero, rebel, liability. No one knew what to call her now. She made her way to the infirmary, her sanctuary. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit her as she pushed the door open. Williams lay on a cot, pale but alive, an IV dripping into his arm. Sat on the next bed, shirt off, his shoulder bandage already stained. Both looked up when she entered. "Doc," Williams rasped, his voice weak but determined. "You saved us." She shook her head, forcing a small smile. "No, we saved each other." His eyes lingered on her. "They're not gonna see it that way, you know." "I know." He leaned back, wincing. "But I saw it. Williams sure as hell saw it. You did what had to be done. Doesn't matter what they say." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let his words wash away the weight pressing on her chest. But she couldn't. Not when his voice still echoed in her ears. She stayed with them through the night, checking vitals, changing dressings, adjusting IVs. The rhythm of her medical work calmed her, anchored her. Here, at least, she knew who she was. Here, no one questioned her worth. But every time she looked at her hands, she remembered the rifle's recoil, the scope's view, the figures falling. She remembered the choice she'd made, the line she'd crossed. And she wondered if she could ever be just a medic again. The review came 3 days later. A panel of officers, their uniforms crisp, their eyes sharper than knives. They listened as laid out the charges: disobedience, recklessness, unauthorized engagement. Then they listened to the reports, testimony. Even Williams, weak but steady, describing how she had saved them all. The panel murmured, argued, weighed. Stood silent, her heart pounding, her palms damp. She thought of her father, of the attic filled with medals, of his quiet voice telling her that purpose mattered more than recognition. She thought of the ridge, of the blood on her gloves, of the way his eyes had widened in disbelief and then softened into respect. Finally, the senior officer looked at her. "Specialist, your actions were outside protocol. You disobeyed orders. You operated beyond your clearance. By every measure of military discipline, this is unacceptable." Her chest tightened. She braced for the hammer. But the officer continued, "Your actions saved lives. The convoy returned intact. The team survived. Sometimes war demands what protocol cannot anticipate. Consider this your first and only warning. You will remain assigned as medic. Your record will note this incident as extraordinary circumstances. Dismissed." Her knees nearly buckled with relief and frustration all at once. Not punished, not rewarded, just contained. She walked out of the tent into the blinding sun. The compound went about its business as if nothing had happened, but she felt the shift. Whispers followed her still, but now they carried a different weight: curiosity, caution, a hint of awe. Found her later, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "You're lucky," he said simply. She shook her head. "No, I'm not." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right, you're not. You're something else now." That night, lying in her bunk, stared at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come. She replayed every shot, every scream, every heartbeat of those hours on the ridge. She thought of Williams' rasping order to keep firing, of disbelief, of cold dismissal. And she realized the truth. She could never go back to being invisible. Not after this. What happens when the thing that saves you is the same thing that divides you? That question lingered like smoke, as walked the compound in the days after the ridge. Her name carried differently now, not just Doc, not just the medic who carried bandages and quiet words of comfort. She was the one who picked up the one who had held the line. To some, that made her a hero. To others, it made her dangerous. Whispers followed her everywhere. "Did you hear? She dropped targets at 1,000 meters." "Yeah, but she disobeyed orders. Could blown the whole mission." Still saved the convoy, didn't she? Or maybe she just got lucky. She learned to keep her head down, to let the words slide past her. But they didn't. Not really. Each one pressed into her skin, carving deeper lines between who she was and who people wanted her to be. The team itself fractured in subtle ways, treated her differently, less like a kid sister, more like someone whose judgment mattered. He asked her opinion in briefings now, almost casually, like it had always been that way. Was quieter, still recovering, his eyes carrying something that looked like guilt. Williams, weak but recovering, called her his guardian angel with a grin that never reached his tired eyes. But others kept their distance. The new comms officer avoided her entirely, muttering that medics weren't meant to kill. Even though professional, carried an edge in his voice when he addressed her, as though her presence was a risk he couldn't yet calculate. It was in this uneasy balance that the next mission came down. A small village north of their AO. Intel suggested insurgent activity, weapons caches, possible coordination hubs. The team was tasked with clearing it, searching, holding until reinforcements arrived. Routine on paper, but knew better. Routine missions were the ones that turned messy fastest. At the briefing, she sat near the back, her notebook open. The map lit up the screen, the village nestled against a hillside, narrow streets like veins, blind corners everywhere. Perfect for ambushes. Stood at the front, voice steady. Your point, flank right, I'll take center with comms. Medical support, keep eyes on casualty flow. Nodded, her pen scratching, but her mind raced faster than her notes. Rooftops provided Overwatch points. Narrow lanes created chokeholds. Escape routes were limited. She saw it all unfolding before anyone stepped foot outside the wire. She wanted to speak, to suggest alternate entry points, to warn about the North Ridge line that could conceal fire teams. But she stopped herself. Her last outburst had nearly cost her everything. Still, when the meeting ended, caught her eye. What are you thinking, Doc? She hesitated, then pointed to the ridge on the map. If I were them, I'd put rifles here, overwatch the main street, kill zone. Studied it, then gave a short nod. I'll cover it. It was a small acknowledgement, but it mattered. Someone was listening. The convoy rolled at dawn, the desert painted in pale gold. Sat cramped in the rear of the vehicle, her pack heavy with medical supplies. Her hands itched with memory, phantom weight of the pressing against her shoulder. She tried to shove it down. She was here as a medic. That was the role, the only role. But when they reached the village, the first crack of rifle fire proved her fears right. It came sharp from the ridge, cutting into the main street as the team dismounted. Bullets sparked against stone walls, forcing them into cover. Contact North Ridge, shouted, his voice drowned in the rattle of gunfire. Swore into the comms, calling for suppressive fire. Returned shots, but his angle was poor. The enemy had the advantage. Pressed against the wall, her heart hammering, she warned them. She'd seen it, and now it was happening exactly as she'd feared. Medic, the cry tore her attention away. A local boy, no older than 12, stumbled into the street, blood running down his leg from a ricochet. His eyes were wide, terrified. His instincts surged. She bolted from cover, skidding beside him, pulling her pack open. Gauze, pressure, wrap. Her hands worked fast, steady, shielding the boy with her own body as bullets cracked overhead. Got you, she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. Stay with me. His voice shouted from behind her. Doc, get back. Then she saw it. Through the haze of dust and fire, a glint on the ridge, a scope, a rifle. Her breath caught. The sniper had her lined up. Time slowed. The boy whimpered beneath her hands. The crack of a rifle split the air. And then silence. She blinked, heart racing. The sniper hadn't fired. Instead, the scope dipped, wavered, then vanished behind the ridge. His rifle barked an instant later. Target down, he shouted. Exhaled a shuddering breath, pulling the boy closer. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. She finished the bandage, lifted him, and carried him to cover. When she set him down, was staring at her, not in disbelief this time, but something harder to name. "You keep running like that, Doc," he muttered, "and you're gonna break yourself before the enemy does." She didn't answer, she couldn't. The mission dragged into the afternoon, street by street, house by house. Moved with the team, patching wounds, calming civilians, her body caught between worlds. One moment she was a medic, hands gentle, voice soft. The next her eyes tracked rooftops and shadows, calculating angles like a sniper. And the team noticed. Some welcomed it, asked her opinion twice on possible entry points, his voice respectful. Leaned on her for spotting ranges when his shoulder ached. But saw it too. His jaw tightened every time her gaze drifted toward a rifle, every time her movements betrayed instincts beyond medicine. When they regrouped at the village edge, the sun low and blood-red, the tension broke. Turned to her, his voice sharp, "Step aside." She froze. "Sir, you think I don't see it? The way you're looking, moving. You're not just carrying a medic's bag anymore. You're hunting. That's not your job, and it's going to get someone killed." Her chest clenched. "With respect, sir, I'm trying to keep us alive." "By breaking discipline," his voice rose. "By thinking you know better than the chain of command. This isn't about your ego, specialist. It's about the team." The word stung. Ego. He thought this was about pride. She wanted to scream that it was. That it was about preparation, about survival, about the simple fact that she couldn't unsee what she knew. That when the moment came, she couldn't stand by. But she swallowed it, her voice came quiet, hoarse. "Yes, sir." The silence stretched, then turned away, his expression unreadable. The ride back to base was heavy, quiet. The boy they'd saved slept beside her, his breathing even, his bandage clean. Watched him, her hands folded in her lap. She'd done her job. She kept him alive. But the commander's words burned hotter than the desert sun. Ego, recklessness, dangerous. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, almost too soft to hear. "Then why does it feel like doing nothing would have been worse?" What happens when the moment you've feared finally arrives? The one you've secretly trained for, the one no one else believes you can face? That was the question carried, as the convoy rolled again into hostile ground. The days after the village blurred together in restless silence. The whispers had grown louder, sharper. Some called her reckless, a liability. Others called her the reason they were still breathing. Words lingered, hard and unyielding. "You're hunting. That's not your job." And yet the mission orders came. Intelligence pointed to a critical weapons transfer in the heart of insurgent territory. The convoy was tasked with intercepting and seizing the cache before it could disperse. High stakes, high risk, a perfect setup for disaster. Checked her bag twice, then a third time. IV fluids, gauze, combat dressings, morphine. She tucked in extra blood expanders, anticipating casualties. She told herself she was ready, but her chest carried a weight heavier than her pack. This time she promised herself she'd stay in her lane. Medic only, no rifles, no stepping beyond her orders. But war doesn't honor promises. The first hour passed in uneasy quiet. Dust trailed behind the vehicles, the horizon stretching endless and empty. Sat wedged between and her hands restless on her pack straps. She watched through the narrow window, her mind sketching angles automatically, the sniper in her refusing to sleep. Then the explosion hit. The lead MRAP erupted in fire, a thunderclap that shook the earth. Metal screamed, smoke billowed, debris rained. The convoy ground to a halt, men shouting, weapons rising. Contact bellowed. Gunfire poured from both ridges, a storm of leads shredding the air. The convoy was caught in a kill box. Bullets sparked against armor, men dove for cover, the comms exploded with overlapping shouts. Ears rang as she threw herself down, instinct already pulling her bag open. The first casualty stumbled toward her, blood streaming down his arm, shock in his eyes. She grabbed him, pulled him down, pressed gauze hard. "Stay with me. Breathe. You'll make it." Another cry, another wound. Her hands blurred, tying tourniquets, checking pulses, moving from one body to the next. The medic in her was alive, fully alive. But over it all she heard another sound. A familiar, terrifying thunder, the crack of a high-caliber rifle, a not theirs. Her head snapped up. Across the ridge, through the haze of smoke, she saw the glint. Enemy sniper. They had the same weapon she'd carried, the same reach, the same dominance. And he was firing into the convoy with devastating precision. One vehicle already burned. Another sagged, its tires blown, its gunner slumped lifeless. Her breath caught. She looked around. Was pinned, his rifle useless at this range. Was firing suppressive bursts, but it was like shouting into a storm. Barked orders into the comms, his face carved with fury, but his words couldn't stop the bleeding or silence the sniper. They had no answer. His pulse thundered. She knew the truth in her bones. Without a counter-sniper, the convoy wouldn't last. Her hands shook as she tied off another bandage. The soldier gripped her arm, whispering, "Don't let me die." She forced a steady smile. "You won't." But inside, the war raged louder than the gunfire. "Stay in your lane, follow orders, heal, don't fight." Or pick up the rifle, break the chain, save them all. Her chest ached with the weight of the choice. She could hear his voice already, condemning her. She could see the panel of officers, their judgment. She could imagine the whispers turning into outright condemnation. And then she saw the convoy, men she'd bandaged, men she'd carried, men who trusted her to keep them alive, pinned down, helpless, dying. Her decision crystallized. She grabbed his arm. "Where the—" His eyes widened. "Don't dock, not again." "Where is it?" He hesitated, then jerked his head toward the rear vehicle. "Stowed with the heavy kit." She sprinted. Bullets cracked past her, dust exploding at her feet. She slid behind the vehicle, ripped open the storage case, and there it was, long, black, heavy, waiting. Her hands gripped it with the familiarity of memory, the echo of the ridge surging back. She slung it over her shoulder, grabbed ammo, and ran for the nearest cover. His voice roared over comms. "Stand down, that's an order." She ignored it. She couldn't obey this time, not if it meant watching them all die. She dropped into the dirt behind a shattered wall, set up and breathed. The world shrank into the scope. Through the smoke, the enemy sniper loomed, calm, steady, professional, a mirror of herself, but on the other side. Her finger hovered, her heart raced. She thought of her father, whispering in memory, "Control is nothing without purpose." Her purpose was here. The shot cracked, thunder rolling across the valley. Through the scope she saw the enemy sniper jerk, stagger, fall. The fell silent. The convoy roared with relief, men shouting, surging, fire renewed. For a heartbeat, hope sparked. But then the enemy surged harder, pouring fire down both ridges. RPGs streaked, grenades rolled, chaos boiling over. Reloaded, sighted, fired again. Each shot dropped another figure, bought another breath. Her shoulders screamed from the recoil. Her hands burned. Her lungs felt like fire, but she didn't stop, she couldn't. Between shots she turned back, dragging wounded behind cover, shoving gauze into bleeding wounds, whispering words she barely believed herself. Then she swung the rifle again, scope snapping to targets, bullets roaring. She was both, medic and sniper, healer and killer, her oath and her betrayal fused into one. Minutes stretched like eternity. The battle raged, each second a coin flip between survival and annihilation. Then, at last, the thundering sound of Allied helicopters split the air. Gunships roared in, missiles streaking into the ridges, tearing the insurgents apart. The enemy broke, scattering into the desert. Silence crashed over the convoy, heavy and suffocating. Smoke curled, bodies lay still. The air stank of cordite and blood. lowered her arms trembling, her cheek raw. Around her, the wounded groaned, the survivors staggered, the convoy held. She had done it again. But when she looked up, was staring at her, his face unreadable, his eyes burning with something between fury and something else he would never say. And knew, this time, there would be no review panel to soften it. This time she had crossed the line for good. How do you return to silence after your hands have thundered louder than anything else on the battlefield? That was the question couldn't shake in the hours after the ambush. The helicopters lifted the convoy out, their rotors whipping sand into the air. The valley shrank beneath them, a strip of earth littered with smoke, bodies, and silence. Men leaned against the metal walls, some bleeding, some slumped in exhaustion, all alive because she had refused to stay in her lane. She sat with her back against the vibrating fuselage, her rifle stripped from her hands the moment the bird touched down. Not confiscated this time, just removed, quietly, deliberately, like no one wanted her to hold it anymore. Her gloves were soaked again, stiff with blood that wasn't hers. Her arms shook from recoil, her shoulder ached deep into the bone. But what hurt most wasn't physical. It was the silence, the way no one spoke to her, the way the team looked at her, not with the disbelief of before, but with something heavier, something they couldn't put into words. She looked at his shoulder, freshly bandaged again. He avoided her eyes, sat across from her, jaw tight, gaze steady but unreadable. Williams, pale and weak, gave her a faint nod but said nothing, and stood near the cockpit, his back turned, radio pressed to his ear. He didn't look at her once. The flight back to base was an eternity of silence. When they landed, medics swarmed the wounded. Should have been among them, her place at their side, but instead she was pulled aside. 2 MPs flanked her, not unkind but firm, guiding her toward the commander's office. Inside stood at the map table, hands braced, head bowed. He looked up as she entered, his face carved from stone. "Sit," he said. She sat, her body heavy, her chest tight. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied her, eyes sharp, searching. Then his voice came low, measured. "You disobeyed me, again." Her throat was dry. "Yes, sir." "You took the again." "Yes, sir." "You killed again." The word hung in the air like smoke. Killed, not saved, not defended, killed. His chest ached. "Sir, if I hadn't." "You had a choice," he snapped, slamming his hand against the table. The sound echoed. "You always have a choice, and you chose to break discipline. You chose to make yourself the weapon, and now," his voice dropped bitter, "now I have to answer for you." She stared at him, her vision blurring. "Then answer this, sir. Would they be alive if I hadn't?" His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Silence stretched, sharp as a blade. Then he straightened, his tone colder. "Command will decide what to do with you. Until then you're confined to quarters. You will not leave. You will not speak of this. Dismissed." The MPs led her out, down the narrow halls, past faces that watched with curiosity and unease. She felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. Her steps were heavy, her body aching, her mind spinning with the same relentless question. Was I wrong? In her quarters the walls closed in. The cot sagged beneath her weight. Her gear lay in a heap by the door, untouched, irrelevant. She sat in the dim light, her hands clasped, her breath shallow. For hours she replayed it all, the sniper's scope glinting across the ridge, the wounded begging for her hands, the silence before each shot, the recoil that bruised more than her shoulder. His voice, sharp with fury, the word killed. She had crossed the line again, not because she wanted to, not because she sought glory, but because she couldn't watch them die. Was that selfish? Was that arrogance? Or was that what her father had meant when he said purpose mattered more than recognition? She didn't know anymore. Days blurred. She wasn't allowed outside the wire. She wasn't called to the infirmary. She wasn't asked for input in briefings. She was invisible again, but in a different way, not overlooked but contained, boxed in, a danger to be managed. And yet the whispers grew louder. She heard them through the thin walls in the mess hall and the corridors. The medic saved the convoy. She's the reason we're alive. She's reckless, dangerous. She did what none of us could. Both truths spread side by side, inseparable. Hero and liability, and breaker of rules. Then the summons came. Another review panel. Officers in crisp uniforms, faces stern, sat at the end, silent, unreadable. They laid out the facts, her disobedience, her unauthorized engagement, her kills, the lives saved, the convoy intact. They asked her to speak. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to scream that she had no choice. But she stopped. She thought of her father. Control is nothing without purpose. She spoke quietly. I didn't act for recognition. I didn't act for myself. I acted because there were lives in front of me that needed saving. If that was wrong, then I accept whatever judgment you decide. Silence. The senior officer leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Discipline is the backbone of this institution. Without it, we fall apart. But sometimes, he paused, his voice softening, sometimes survival demands more than discipline. He looked at her long and hard. Specialist, your record will remain. Your actions will not be commended, but they will not be punished. You will remain in service. You will remain a medic. Her chest loosened, but only slightly. Not punished, not commended, just allowed. Dismissed again. She walked out into the sunlight, blinking against its harsh glare. The compound bustled as always, but it felt different now. The stairs carried something else, not just whispers, not just curiosity, something deeper. Found her later at the edge of the range. She hadn't touched a rifle since that day. She didn't trust herself to. He stood beside her in silence for a long time. Then finally he spoke. You saved them. She didn't look at him. And broke your orders. His jaw tightened. Both can be true. She turned then, meeting his eyes. So which one will they remember? He held her gaze, then shook his head. Neither, both, depends on who tells the story. And with that he walked away. She stood alone, the weight of it all pressing on her. The medic who wasn't just a medic. The sniper who wasn't supposed to be a sniper. The woman who crossed lines to save lives and in doing so lost the clarity of who she was supposed to be. That night she wrote a letter, not the kind you leave in a drawer but the kind you send, to her father, to tell him the truth, that his lessons had saved her, that she had lived them even when it cost her. That control had been her anchor and purpose had been her guide. She ended it with one line, I don't know if I was right, I only know I couldn't do nothing. Weeks later she deployed again. Missions came, missions went. Sometimes she was only the medic. Sometimes her eyes still drifted to, calculating, waiting. Sometimes the team looked at her with trust, sometimes with caution. But slowly, quietly, something changed. They listened more when she spoke. They asked her thoughts on terrain, on angles, on timing, not officially, not in front of command, but in the quiet moments, in the spaces between. They saw her differently. Not just Doc, not just the medic. Something else. And maybe that was enough. Because war doesn't offer clean titles. It doesn't separate healer from fighter, rules from survival. It blurs, it breaks, it reshapes. Had been just a medic, she had become something more, something harder to name. And in the end, maybe that was the point. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.